Good morning. Welcome to NASA headquarters. My name is Cindy Steele, and I'm from the Office of Communications. We are here today to celebrate the accomplishments of some very talented middle and high school students who have participated in the Beating the Odds Foundation Student Success and Leadership Program assignment for 2016, NASA's Twin Study. This year marks the third year in which the Beating the Odds Foundation and NASA have come together with an exciting research challenge for students across Pennsylvania. The 2014 research project focused on the Hubble Space Telescope, and the 2015 research project focused on the Exploration Design Challenge. This year's research project will focus on the Twin Study, 1 year in space. You were challenged to build upon the work that looks at the technology and hardware side of the issue by applying the stepping stones to success model to the human side via NASA's Twin Study. I am pleased to welcome this year's participants to headquarters, as well as your classmates and teachers in Pennsylvania who are watching this program on NASA TV. So as I call your name, I would love for you to stand and wave. Abraham Lincoln High School. Thank you. Altoona Area High School. Thank you. Bellwood Antis Middle School. Thank you. Carmichael's Junior Senior High School. Welcome. Fraser Middle High School. Wow, welcome. Laurel Highlands Middle School. Welcome. Margaret Bell Miller Middle School. Welcome. Mapletown Junior Senior High School. Welcome. South Park High School. Washington Junior Senior High School. Welcome, students. So later in the program, we will hear from these amazing students as they present the results of their research projects. But first, we have a welcome message from NASA Administrator Charles Bolden.
Hello, I'm Charlie Bolden, NASA Administrator. Thank you all for traveling to NASA headquarters. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I send my greetings to the Beating the Odds Foundation and all of you in Washington and Pennsylvania. My message to the students is pretty simple. Work hard, study hard, and don't be afraid of failure. By dreaming big and applying those principles to your life, you can't go wrong. When I grew up in South Carolina, my state was segregated, and opportunities were scarce for people like me. Luckily, my parents were educators and led by their inspiring examples. My path to success came through public service and a lot of hard work in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM. I know that just by being here, you also have an interest in those fields. Let me tell you, we need you. There's likely to be a shortfall of people trained in STEM disciplines in the coming decades, and that's where you come in. NASA is on a journey to Mars, and we need every single person we can get who has the passion, skills, and dedication to make that happen. That work encompasses every STEM discipline. Your thoughts about our twin study with astronauts Scott and Mark Kelly, and how the results of that work can be applied to both space travel and to improve life here on Earth, are examples of the broad range of knowledge we need to gather for future missions. I want to congratulate all of you, both students and mentors, for your motivation, your willingness to work hard, and your creativity. Keep working on those, and you could be taking a seat across from the NASA Administrator as we plan our next missions to space with humans and robotic explorers. Take advantage of your mentor's knowledge and of every experience. Not everything you learn will be in the classroom. You should feel proud of your accomplishments as individuals and as a team. If you're not yet sure STEM is for you, maybe this experience has helped you decide. We're on a path to do some of the greatest things humanity has ever done, and you are on a path to join us. So congratulations, and keep going.
Thank you, Administrator Bolden. So before I introduce our first guest speaker, I'd like to acknowledge a few of our program partners who are here with us today. I'd like to give a special shout out to Rocco Scalzi, the founder of the Beating the Odds Foundation, without whom we would not be here today for this really exciting program. I'd like to also welcome Jackie Shia from the Challenger Learning Center and Henry Bell from Sports One Marketing. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. John Charles, the Human Research Program Manager at the Johnson Space Center, who will discuss the twin study from the perspective of the NASA and the program partner scientists. Welcome, Dr. Charles. You're welcome.
Good morning. This is exciting to be here with so many Pennsylvanians. I went to high school outside of Pittsburgh many, many centuries ago, and I have a lot of fondness for you all and for that part of the country. Today we're talking about the future, not the distant past. When I went to high school riding on my dinosaur, we're talking about where the future is and where we're going to take it. And I want to tell you about our version of the twin study. I look forward to hearing about your version after us two presenters finish up. So I'm going to tell you about the work that we did getting ready for the one-year mission, getting ready for the twin study, and then proceeding with the analysis. You're all familiar with the twins concept, of course. Scott Kelly, who flew on the International Space Station for a year, Mark Kelly, his brother, both of them astronauts, Mark, a retired astronaut, who, along with his brother Scott, were volunteered to be subjects for this investigation, actually fairly willingly. And they provided us a lot of data, a lot of insight that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. The first thing that people always ask when I start talking about the twin study is, what did you learn? And that's a reasonable thing to be asking for an investigation that was such high priority and so visible for an entire year of the time that the astronauts were in space. And the answer is nothing yet, because the samples only just came back to Earth 2 days ago on the unmanned SpaceX cargo vehicle. So when I say nothing, we've learned a great deal about how to do experiments, and actually some data from the scientists that were making measurements on the astronauts, but much of the biological data only just returned. And that's one of the important lessons I want to tell you about, is that we don't live in a world like you might see on TV with Bones or CSI or Tony Stark with his amazing three-dimensional hologram data analysis system. The work that we do making measurements and collecting data, understanding what happens to astronauts in spaceflight is a lots of hands-on work. It's a lot of work involving making measurements on people, taking samples from people. I'll show you what those samples are in a few minutes, and then analyzing them and collecting data from a fairly large number of measurements so you can understand what really is data and what is just noise in the system. So someday perhaps we'll have a smooth functioning holographic system like you see in the movies and TV, but we're not there yet. So that's why I'm saying it takes a while for us to get the results back. Ask us in a year what we learned, and I'll give you some more definitive results. But what we think we're going to learn is sort of illustrated in this image. We have data from, or potential data, let's call it a biological parameter. You get to choose which one, from the two astronauts, Mark Kelly, who stayed on Earth and made measurements for a year, and Scott Kelly, who flew for a year in the International Space Station. What we're doing is comparing the results from the two twin astronauts. The idea being that anything that happens in the twin astronaut who is in space is probably associated with spaceflight versus the normal variations in parameters and biological parameters that occur in Mark on the ground. So by making comparisons of the two astronauts' data, even though there's only two astronauts and even though there's only one in space, we feel like we can be fairly confident about the changes that occur in the human body in spaceflight at the level of the chromosome, and detailed information like that is going to be very helpful in identifying future research directions for us. One of the things that, one of the words that has become fairly famous in this context in connection with this investigation, this flight study, is the term omics. Omics refers to the collection of data that can be measured from the very smallest level in the human body to the very largest. We talk about genomics. The genome is the DNA, the messenger, the code that codes for all of your life functions in your DNA. The collection of DNA and how it is all metabolized and handled by the body is called the genome, and a study of that is genomics. DNA is transcribed by RNA, and the study of RNA and everything associated with it is called transcriptomics. The RNA codes for the amino acids that go into the protein, and those are called proteins and proteomics. And then the proteins are involved in our metabolism in our whole body, so that's the metabolomics and the metabolome. And so all of this sort of builds on each step from the smallest to the largest to make us what we are and allow us to function here on the Earth and potentially even successfully in long-duration spaceflight. We selected 10 investigations through a competitive process to help us understand what happens to astronauts at the genetic level in long-duration spaceflight. 5 of these investigators were brand new to NASA. They had never thought about proposing an investigation to NASA before, but they were taken, as you were, by the idea of making measurements on twins for the first time in all of history. This is the first and so far only pair of twin astronauts involved as astronauts in spaceflight, and the first time in all of history that we've made coordinated measurements on one twin in orbit and the other twin on the ground. So these are the investigators that were involved for the first time in NASA life sciences investigations. We hope not for the last time. And we also had 5 more investigators who were slightly more familiar with the way NASA does work, and they provided some additional very important and very detailed information on the twins in space. So I want to show you very briefly how we attack the problem, the problem of understanding what happens to people in spaceflight at the level of the chromosome, where all the DNA is found. First, the astronauts, either Scott or Mark, provided the basic tissue samples, blood and so forth, and then they were analyzed they will be analyzed once the samples come back and are distributed to the scientists at the chromosomal level for evidence of mutations. We have all heard about mutations in spaceflight. They're almost always less interesting than they look like in the Fantastic Four movies, and people very seldom come back from space with superpowers. There's different ways that those chromosomal changes can be monitored through things like methylation of the chromosome, and then the transcription molecule, the RNA, is also being studied and leading to our understanding of changes in how the proteins that the body makes based on the instructions in the DNA and coded and transcribed by the RNA are processed. Then we also have the way that the DNA is bundled to make up the chromosomes. And we have the study of the immune system, which is one of the proteins and one of the functions coded by the proteome. We have understanding of the integrated functioning of the immune system, and a very interesting study about the telomere length. The telomere is the end of the chromosome, which may be related to the degree of aging. It may be what actually tells your body whether you're getting older or not in terms of chromosomal function. And there's some evidence that being in spaceflight may alter the function of this portion of the chromosome that indicates aging, such that spaceflight may be associated with increased physiological aging, not chronological, of course. Of course, clock time changes nothing as you go in spaceflight, but physiological aging may alter in spaceflight. Additional insights into highly integrated functioning of the immune system and the whole integrated metabolome as the body is using all the proteins coded by all the DNA in its daily functioning, and that daily functioning is reflected not only in the person but in the microbiome. The microbiome is the collection of biological specimens that actually live inside each and every one of us. In this general area, in the gut, you actually have more living cells living inside of you than there are cells that make up you. So we have to be very considerate of our microbiome to make sure it treats us well. And then the integrated functioning of the entire organism as expressed by cognition, by the way your brain functions, and the vasculature, the blood vessels that allow the human body to function and provide the nutrients and the life support to the rest of the organism. So every level, from the smallest to the greatest, to the grossest, in the human body, we have studied for the first time in an integrated fashion in this twin study. An investigation that's very interesting is, for example, the astronauts gave themselves flu shots, both before flight and in flight, and then they will do so again after flight. And I've illustrated that with these pictures just because it's unusual for us to get pictures of astronauts actually doing the investigations to themselves. But these two astronauts were glad to do it, and in fact, they posted these pictures on Facebook, so there was no question about whether we could use the pictures or not. They were published. So it's very interesting to see Scott Kelly on the space station last September giving himself the flu shot, and then Mark Kelly a few days later back in Houston doing the same thing in a way of synchronizing the investigation so we can compare the results of the inoculation in both crew members, one in space and one on the ground. I told you I'd tell you a little bit more about the samples. Essentially, we sampled every body fluid that we could think of. And yes, that goes all the way from the scrapings of the inside of the mouth and saliva sampling, collecting urine, collecting blood. The astronauts are very good at giving blood. Sometimes they even take their own blood. They actually make the venipuncture and collect their own blood. And we also collected stool. That is the number 2. So imagine the glory and the fame and honor of being an astronaut and then being handed a little plastic cup and say, oh, by the way, we need to collect some of your number 2. Please help us out. And they did so very happily. I'm not sure if they were happy or not, but they did so very gracefully, let's say. And that will be part of the analysis that we perform to understand the effects of spaceflight on the microbiome. As you have no doubt determined in your own study of the twins, getting into the omics domain, getting into the genetic domain for human research is problematical. There are ethical issues. There are ethical issues with finding out things that perhaps people didn't want you to find out, finding out things that perhaps the people themselves didn't want to find out about their genetic past. There may be issues with relationships that the family had addressed but are revealed in genetics. There may be issues with disease likelihoods that the family would prefer not to think about, but they are revealed in your genetics. So anytime we engage in genetics research, we involve counselors to guide the participants through the analysis of the samples so that when the results come back, they know what the results really mean. There are issues with medical care. The medical care is related to your propensity, your likelihood to get this or that disease, and how much do you want to know about it, how much preparation do you want to make for it, and so forth. There's issues of occupational health. Maybe you might find out that certain of your genetic markers disqualify you from your dream job. So these astronauts are actually very brave in allowing us to make measurements on their omics, because it may turn out that there's something in there that says they really shouldn't be exposed to high radiation values or things like that. They were both in fact, one was retired and the other was at the end of his career, so they had nothing really to lose and everything to gain. But doing research in the future on active duty astronauts might be complicated by the fact that being a volunteer in this study might end up making it more difficult for you to actually do your life's work, which is flying in space. There's a possibility of some difficulty with getting insurance. What if insurance companies find out that you have an increased tendency towards this or that disease? They might want to impose higher rates on you or provide other kinds of restrictions on your coverage. And in general, like I say, it might involve restrictions on your ability to exercise your career choice, whether it's astronaut or anything else. But the point of the twin study was the fact that we got an opportunity to do some very unique measurements because of the presence of Scott Kelly on the International Space Station for a year. Many people don't realize, though, that we didn't select Scott because he was a twin. We did the twin study because Scott was a twin. Scott was selected to spend 1 year on the space station along with his Russian counterpart, Mikhail Kornienko, and then we had the opportunity to do the twin study. If there had been another astronaut on the space station for a year, we wouldn't be here today talking about twins. We might be talking about something else, but the twin study probably would not have happened because we would not have had a twin in space. Why we're doing 1 year missions, we're doing 6-month missions, but why we did a 1 year mission is because future space missions will be even longer than 6 months or a year. The design reference mission, that is the sort of a straw man mission for a Mars expedition in the mid-2030s, will be about 900 days long, almost 2.5 years in space. We have a lot of experience with astronauts on 6-month missions. We have now a little bit of experience with astronauts on 1-year missions, and all of that is to help us understand what will happen to the human body during a 2.5-year space flight from the Earth to Mars, which may take 6 or 7 or 8 months, depending on a lot of orbital mechanical questions. 18 months on Mars, and then 6 or 7 or 8 months coming back to Earth. Add it all up, it's 2.5 years, far longer than we have experience with, but we're trying to understand how to get that knowledge now from work on the International Space Station. The kinds of things we're worried about are medical events, what happens to normal, healthy people in long-duration spaceflight, what happens to normal, healthy people in a very operational environment where things can go wrong. We want to understand how to keep them healthy and fit and functioning while they're weightless and while they're isolated and confined and while their food choices are more limited than you all have access to here on the Earth. Resistive exercise, as you see in this picture, is a very good way, it seems, to keep the bones and the muscles healthy. So we're probably going to do more resistive exercise in long-duration spaceflight. But there are other changes in the human body that we have to continue to monitor as well. And one of those other changes might be what happens upstairs, what happens inside of your head, the psychological and psychosocial aspects of spaceflight, because astronauts going to Mars will be isolated like nobody's ever been isolated before. If you have a crew of 4 or 6 people going to Mars, they will be the only people on Mars. And if you're face to face with even your very best friend for 2.5 years in a space far smaller than this meeting room, imagine what kind of stresses and what kind of pressures you'll come up with before the end of 2.5 years. Our goal is to understand what those pressures will be and to develop the treatments, the countermeasures, the conditioning, the training to keep astronauts very healthy, very happy, very functional for the duration of their long-duration flight. So there's always going to be pictures of happy, smiling astronauts and not pictures of astronauts having bad days. Astronauts don't take pictures of themselves having bad days anyhow, so I had to go to a movie to get a picture to illustrate it here. But the point is we want to keep the astronauts healthy, happy, and functioning at a high level for the entire 2.5-year mission. We did a couple of investigations on this mission to help us understand some of the problems of spaceflight. One was the fluid shifts study to understand the effect of weightlessness on the cardiovascular system, and this actually involved American-made monitoring equipment moved in whole to the Russian section of the space station to use a Russian device that changes the body's fluid distribution. We did this 3 times in flight. We're doing it on subsequent space station missions as a way of understanding some of the basic physiology of spaceflight. This is probably the most complex biomedical investigation ever done on the space station because it involved coordination between the US and the Russian space programs in a way that had not been done before. We hope to make it easier in the future to do more of these kind of investigations. We also did a very important investigation for this 1-year mission and for previous missions, and that is something we call the field test investigation. The field test involves taking astronauts after they land in the Soyuz capsule in Kazakhstan and putting them in a tent and asking them to do certain very, very simple basic movements, standing up from a chair, standing up from laying flat on the ground, bending over and picking things up, walking in a straight line, things that give us a very good indication of their very basic sensory motor and musculoskeletal coordination. The reason we're doing this is not because we want to torment them, that's just a benefit, but the reason we're doing this is because we're trying to understand what happens to astronauts in long-duration space flights so we can prepare the landing capabilities of the vehicles that go to Mars. This is sort of a mimic, sort of a simulation of landing on Mars. And the first thing that people do on Mars will be to have to get out of their spacecraft and establish their habitat and do some very, very basic housekeeping activities on the surface. So we try to understand what happens to people immediately after long-duration spaceflight as a way of understanding what happens to people as soon as they get to Mars. You'll notice in the top picture here, the astronauts that have just gotten out of the Soyuz spacecraft are surrounded by well-wishers and caretakers, and they're put in chaise lounges and carried to the medical tent. When you go to Mars, there's not going to be anybody there waiting for you. So the purpose of our work and the Human Research Program and the work that's being done on the 1-year mission and the work of the twins study investigators is to understand as well as we can what happens to the human body in spaceflight so we can prepare the astronauts for their long-duration missions so they will be successful, they will be productive on the surface of Mars. And when I say they, I mean you. Very likely, some of you will be involved in Mars missions, perhaps even the people that go to Mars. So I'm hopeful that the work we're doing today will be reflected in your future successes as we all move forward to understand what happens to astronauts on long-duration space flights in preparation for trips to Mars and perhaps beyond. With that, thank you very much.
We're going to take some Q&A.
Oh, sure.
So we have an opportunity to take some questions. Thank you, Dr. Charles. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will bring a mic to you. Any questions for Dr. Charles?
Over here.
Oh, there's one up front.
How do the aspects of space and space radiation affect the psychological and makeup of a human?
That is probably one of the most important questions we're trying to understand. Deep space flight, especially space flight beyond Earth's magnetic field, exposes the astronauts to galactic cosmic radiation, which is extremely high energy, heavy particles that come from throughout the universe, as well as radiation from the sun, the solar flares, the electrons and protons that come from the sun. The effects of that on the psychological performance, the psychological, psychosocial aspects of astronauts can be detrimental. If you take too much radiation to the wrong part of your brain, you might lose the ability to think clearly, the ability to control your spacecraft, and so forth. We have not seen that, and our job is to protect the astronauts from that happening, but that is one of the most important risks that we are addressing. And the work we're doing now is done largely on the Earth because we can mimic that radiation environment in small animals and test specimens and try to understand the effects on them and then translate those effects to humans in spaceflight. But in the not too distant future, I'm hopeful we're going to be putting astronauts, perhaps even some of you all, in orbital stations around the moon where the astronauts will be exposed to that radiation themselves, and we'll see how well we did in preparing those astronauts for that work. So thank you. Good question. Thank you.
Other questions for Dr. Charles? There's a question here in the front.
By 2030, how many goals do you think you would have accomplished with the Mars missions?
By 2030, our job is to have answered all of the basic questions we were studying on the International Space Station. In fact, it's not even 2030. We think the space station is going to sort of not be available to us for very much longer than 2024. And the Human Research Program is targeted on resolving all the risks that we've identified by then, or perhaps in a few years thereafter. So we will probably never answer all the questions that we have, but what we will do is understand the questions and understand what we call the residual risks, which means that we will make things as safe as they can be with the knowledge and the resources we have. Then at some point in 2030 or 2035, we will say, okay, we've done everything we can, and we'll go to the program manager for the Mars mission and say, it's as safe as we can make it. There are these additional risks. If you as the program manager think it's worth going to Mars with these additional risks, then we're with you. We'll work with you to make it as safe as we can. So I would like to say everything by 2030, and you'll know that I'm just kidding because we're going to get as close as we can by 2030. Thank you. Good question.
We have one more question in the front.
It will be in a second. Try again.
Both astronauts have been to space, so how is it properly, how will they properly be able to
You're good.
be compared to each other if they've both been to space?
Another very good question, and that kind of question that we had to ask ourselves before we embarked on the twin study. The astronauts themselves answered that question. They said Mark had 54 days in orbit, and at the end of the 1 year, Scott will have had over 500 days in orbit. So if there's a differential effect of spaceflight, you should see it clearly in Scott versus Mark. The other thing is that when you come back to Earth, you readapt to life on Earth. So although you have been in space, and in cases for 2 weeks or 6 months if you've been on the space station, you are an Earthling when you come back and you readapt to life on Earth. So by making measurements on Mark, we can compare the life, what happens in a normal person on the Earth with what happens to the astronaut in space, And whatever happens during that period, we have to believe is associated with one of them being in space and the other being on Earth. This is not a statistically strong study. We only have 2 subjects, only one of whom is in space. We understand that very clearly. We all went to school. We studied statistics. We know how that works. But this was the only opportunity we had to make this measurement. The only twins we have ever had and may ever have as astronauts were available for this study. And the question you raised and others were raised for us by the press and by other scientists who said, you're not really going to learn anything. And we said, we got to try. And we decided to proceed because we figured we would be criticized if we did it, and we'll be criticized if we didn't do it. So let's do it and be criticized and still have results. So thank you. That's an excellent question.
And we have our final question from this young woman here.
Yes.
Besides radiation, what do you think is the biggest risk of going to Mars?
Well, the biggest risk we're thinking about are radiation, isolation, because it's just going to be, if you go to Mars, you and 4 of your closest personal friends locked up in a vehicle the size of a Winnebago. And isolation means confinement, and it also means distance from the Earth. You're going to be 20 minutes away from Earth by radio wave at the halfway point of your mission. That means if you call the ground and say, Houston, we have a problem, it's going to be 20 minutes before they hear it and 24 minutes before they call back and say, what was that? Say that again. So isolation, confinement, and autonomy. And autonomy in the case of medical problems, if somebody breaks an arm or gets injured, it's going to be just you all taking care of that person. There's not going to be anybody else. There's not going to be any ER to take them to. Things like medical care and things like nutrition. How do we provide the right kind of food for a 2.5-year mission when there is no resupply? And the deep space environment has effects not only on people, but on the food itself. It may change the nutritiousness of the food. So those are probably the top 3, 4, 5 risks that we have. Radiation is a big one, and the others are not. Oh, and also weightlessness, because weightlessness has the effect of deconditioning the body unless you do lots of resistive exercise, like that picture I showed. So what's not to be excited about? It's going to be a challenging environment to be in. Thank you. Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Charles. Our next speaker is Dr. Shawn Domagal-Goldman from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, who will discuss our search for life in the universe. Welcome, Dr. Domagal-Goldman.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to tell a story about my place, and I hope your place in the search for life in the universe, that starts when I was about your age, and it's not going to end until you're about my age. And the story starts about 20 years ago. I was in high school or college. I actually can't remember what year it was, but I was, again, about your age. And my brother and I didn't always get to look at the night sky. We lived in Chicago. There was too much, just like there's a lot of light shining down on me now, there was too much light from the city of Chicago for us to see the stars very well. But on this particular night, there was a lunar eclipse, so we ran outside because the moon was blocked, and we could see the stars pretty well. So we were sitting there out on our front lawn, just looking up at the stars, and my brother turns to me and he asks me, do you think we're alone? I look at him and I think, well, there's a lot of stars out there. Surely a lot of those stars have planets, and yeah, a few of those planets probably have life. There's just too many stars out there and probably too many planets for there to not be life. That's what I told him. How many people think that that's about right? Okay. Now, I'm going to challenge you to prove it. Okay? Not now, not here in this room, but over the course of your career, prove that we're not alone in the universe. That's essentially my job, or a big part of my job here at NASA. And so how are we going to prove it? Just with the astronaut study, we're not just going to, make some inferences or some speculation about there's a lot of stars out there, so surely there's life on other worlds. Dr. Charles isn't just saying, well, I think these things are going to happen to these astronauts, so just trust me on that. Okay? He's actually making measurements. He just said he can't tell you what he's learned so far because he just got the samples back 2 days ago. Okay? I can't tell you whether or not we're alone in the universe because we haven't even built the mission to find out whether or not we're alone in the universe yet. And I'm not sure, are the slides going to come up? There we go. So what we do at NASA, whether it's for the human spaceflight program or whether it's for the planetary science program that sends robots to the entire solar system, or whether it's for the astrophysics or heliophysics divisions that study the rest of the cosmos, or the Earth Sciences division that studies life here on Earth and how we're affecting our climate. We have to build testable hypotheses and then create spacecraft and build spacecraft that can test those hypotheses by gathering the data that we need to test the hypotheses. So when I was talking about what I said to my brother, that there's a lot of stars out there, and surely a lot of those stars have a lot of planets associated with them, we didn't have the observations for that, not then. But there were people that at that point were developing a mission called the Kepler Space Telescope that was able to test that hypothesis, that a lot of stars have planets. So I'm just going to step through this. So what you see here is a chart. Okay, on the vertical axis is the size of the planets that we know of, and on the horizontal axis is how far those planets are from their host star. What you see now are the planets in our own solar system, including some things like the moon that I think are basically planets. It's just they orbit other planets. And this is scaled to Earth, so if you're at 1 on this diagram on either axis, you just have the value that Earth has, that we have here on our home planet. I'll point out that the bottom axis is flipped around just because usually we're used to seeing the stars on the left side of these types of diagrams, and the hot stuff close to the stars on the far left and the cold stuff on the far right. Okay, so these are the planets in our solar system, just to orient yourself. Okay, here's where I put these axes up because it's helpful when we're thinking about whether or not any of the planets we find could harbor life. And when I say could they harbor life, I'm not talking about any kind of life. You know, you can grow microbes in water that's pretty much at the freezing point. Everywhere we've looked on Earth that we found liquid water, we found life. Okay? And so when I talk about life here, it's about the kind of life that would be so pervasive that we'd be able to detect it from across interstellar space. And because everywhere we've looked for life on Earth, we've found, everywhere we've looked for life where there's water, we've found life. Well, if water is that common denominator, and that's why NASA's had this follow the water strategy, that means that the planets we look for around other stars that could have enough life to make a big enough signal for us to see it from far, far away are the planets that also have a lot of water, basically global oceans of water at the surface of their planets. That's what we're looking for. And that's relevant to the axes on these chart. If you're too close to the planet, that water is going to turn into steam, and it's going to bake itself away. And you'll end up with no oceans left on the surface. You'll end up with something kind of like Venus in our own solar system, too hot to harbor liquid water oceans and then global pervasive biospheres. Okay, so that's one wall. That's one limit to this diagram. If you're to the left of that, you're too hot for global biospheres. You can also be too cold. If you move too far away, like Mars, or certainly further out in the solar system or another planetary system, your water will freeze. It'll turn into ice, and then you won't have any liquid water for the life. That's bad too. It's another wall. You could also be too small. The moon, right, it gets the same amount of energy from the sun that we get from the sun on Earth. But it's too small to hold on to its atmosphere. And if you can't hold on to an atmosphere, you can't hold on to the liquid water at the surface. So you can be too small. There's another line, another wall. You can also be too big. If you're too big, you can become a gas giant, and you'll have all this hydrogen condensing around you, and then you'll be too dense to maintain liquid water at the surface. So that's the last one. Okay? Now these 4 walls form a box, and that box is the happy place. Okay? That's my happy place, right? That's the habitable zone. Any planets we find inside that blue box are the ones that have the conditions that could allow not just for life, but global life. Life that would give us a big enough signal for us to see it if we designed an experiment that went and looked for it. Okay? So these are the planets we found. Okay? When I was talking to my brother, we knew of fewer planets beyond our solar system than in it. When I was your age, which wasn't that long ago. Okay? It's 20 years ago. Now we know of literally thousands of planets beyond our solar system. Many more beyond our solar system than in it. And not only that, we know of planets in that happy blue box. Planets that could harbor life that we could detect from far away. Now, why were we able to do that? We're able to do it because some scientists thought of a way to test the hypothesis that stars have planets around them, and that some of those planets could harbor these conditions that could have global biospheres. And not only did they have that idea of how to do it, they got in touch with amazing engineers at NASA and our partners in industry that then went and built the spacecraft that did the test, that did the observations. And it took a long time. If you ever want to hear a story of perseverance, Look up the story of the Kepler Space Telescope and Bill Barucki, the PI. He tried and was told no and no and no and no and no. And eventually he convinced people that it would work. They built the spacecraft, and it's, in my mind, one of the most amazing things this agency has ever done. Okay. Next slide. So going forward, there's two things we've learned from the Kepler Space Telescope. Actually, well, I'll say three things. First, stars have planets. They're suns. These stars are suns in the sky that have planets around them. Second, some of the planets that we found have conditions that would allow us to look for life on them in the future. And third, if you look at the scatter of dots here, a lot of these dots fall nowhere near the planets in our own solar system. And so the things that we think of when we think about planets around these other stars, we base that on our own experience. You know, we base them on Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and the gas giants in the outer solar system. We expect things to look like the things that we're familiar with. But because the data on this slide goes so far beyond the dots that I had up there for our solar system, we found things that we didn't expect. They totally surpassed our expectations. They've caused us to rewrite the textbooks, literally, on what planets can be like, how they form, how they evolve. It's even affected how we view our own solar system and how it has changed over time. And that's all done because of this Kepler spacecraft. I should also point out, all this was done on a patch of sky the size of your hand. Okay, so if you go out tonight and you put your hand against the sky like this and just put your hand up against the stars, the dots I just showed, of which there are thousands, all were found in a patch of sky that's this big. Now, the last thing we learned of is and this is what I was referring to earlier, is lots of weird stuff that we didn't expect. Okay, we found planets that are much bigger than Earth, but smaller than the gas giants. We didn't think those were there. They turn out to be the most common planets in the universe, or at least in the parts of it we've explored so far. We also found these planets like Kepler 16b that orbit double star systems. So, you know, we have our Earth, it's orbiting the sun, but Kepler 16b actually has two suns that are orbiting each other. Okay, so it's one planet going around two stars. Now, if you stood at the surface of that planet, you'd see a double sunset every evening. You wouldn't see one star setting, but you'd see two. Now, astronomers thought that was impossible until we did these observations. I always thought they were possible. I knew they were possible, but that's because I was looking at a different literature than they were. And there's a point here, too, right? I mean, I'm telling a joke, but there's some truth to this. Sometimes we have to rely on the science fiction authors to be the visionaries that push us to look for things that we might not expect from the scientific literature. So I'm going to go back to that moment where I was sitting there with my brother on the front lawn looking at the stars, right? So I told him, look, there's a lot of stars out there. Surely that means there's a lot of planets. Some of those planets could have the conditions for life. And yeah, that means we're probably not alone, okay? Well, think about it. I knew there were lots of stars. I could see them with my eyes. We didn't know at the time if those stars had planets or how many of them did. We know that now, thanks to the Kepler Space Telescope and amazing ground-based telescope observations. We also know that some of those planets could have life. But what we don't know, what we haven't figured out yet, is that challenge I just gave to all of you at the start of this presentation. Prove that some of those planets have life. How do we do that? What's the next telescope we could build that could look for signs of life on these worlds? And it's a hard problem. This isn't a mistake. I've had some slide issues, but this isn't one of them. There's a blue dot on this screen, but it's pretty much impossible to see. And the reason is that the white light from everything else on this screen is literally washing out the blue dot that's hidden on it. Now, if I make it black, it's still really hard to see, okay? So now I've gotten rid of that white light, but there's a second problem, which is the blue dot that's hiding on the screen is really, really faint. You still might not be able to see it, but the arrow's pointing to it right there, okay? So with a little help, you might be able to see it, but it's still really hard. There's two challenges that I just put up there, okay? If you have a faint blue dot surrounded by a ton of white light, you can't see the blue dot. And even if you cancel out all that white light, you still need a really good observation to be able to see the blue dot, even if it's the only thing in what you're trying to look at. Now, when it comes to building a mission, that means that we have two technical challenges that we have to solve. Versus, and I should say I did that because when we build this, the test we have to do is we have to get light from these planets. Okay? Everything we've done so far is basically looking at how the planet causes a star to wobble back and forth or side to side, or it blocks out a little bit of light from the star. What we want to do, to look for life on these worlds, we have to get light from the planet itself. But the problem is, the star that it's sitting next to is 1 billion times brighter than the planet. So for every photon we get from the planet, unless we do something about it, we're going to get 1 billion photons from the star. That means we have to cancel out 1 billion stellar photons and not lose any of those precious photons from the pale blue dot. It also means that once we do that, once we cancel out that white light and we can focus on the blue dot, it's so pale we have to have a really big telescope to see it. And Dr. Charles said, look, we've only got one astronaut or two astronauts who've been able to do this test with, one in space and one on the ground. That he's not happy with those statistics, right? Well, if you ask me about life in the universe, we've got one sample size right now, the one that we're living on. I'd like a lot more data than just that one sample point. And the bigger the telescope, the more sample we're going to get. The larger sample size, the better statistics, the better we're going to be able to draw conclusions about how lonely the universe is. Okay, so this chart just shows we got Hubble on the far left. We're building the. Are you all going to see James Webb today? Yes, awesome. So you're going to see this gold thing today. It looks okay in a PowerPoint slide. In person, it's spectacular. It's like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then on the right, we're thinking about leveraging what we're doing with James Webb to build something even bigger and also give it the technology it needs to block out the starlight. Now, if we do that, it's leveraging the heritage we have from all these other missions. So when we do things at NASA, whether it's human spaceflight, whether it's putting a robot on the surface of Mars, whether it's building these awesome space telescopes, whatever we do, it's not like we're just sitting there thinking, you know what? Buy me a space telescope. It's going to look like this, just build it. We don't count on miracles either. What we do, and I'm a Cubs fan, okay? So I've got a lifelong experience believing in miracles. I'm a Penn State fan too, okay? So I know what it means to believe in miracles. But at NASA, my job here isn't to rely on them, okay? My job is to think about the things we've done before, right? Think about the people that have done those things before, and think about how do we leverage that expertise to do the things we want to do next. So if it's human spaceflight, we're talking about building new human capsules and new rockets and a new infrastructure for space exploration that leverages the things we've done before and the collective knowledge of the people that have done them. And by the way, the human spaceflight experiments that Dr. Charles talked about is part of that. We're not just sending humans to Mars without having any idea at all of what might happen to them when they get up there. By the time we send them up, we'll have done a long series of investigations on what's going to happen to their physiologies before they even go to the launch pad for that journey to Mars. For space telescopes, we're leveraging all the stuff we've built before and the things we've learned from it. So we think about Hubble, which has been in orbit for 25 years, and how astronauts have helped keep it alive for that long. We think about the James Webb Space Telescope, which you're going to see today, which teaches us how to build bigger telescopes and scale them up and fold them up in like this origami transformer telescope thing so it fits in the rocket. We're going to have things like WFIRST, which is proving the technologies we need to do that difficult job of blocking out the starlight. And then we have a whole series of science missions like TESS and Kepler and WFIRST and JWST and Hubble that are giving us science information on the universe in which these observations are going to be occurring. That helps us understand how to build the telescopes even better. So if you take that pale blue dot, I haven't actually answered the question of okay, you got a pale blue dot, what does that mean? How do you know if there's life on it? Okay. The way you do that is you actually don't just rely on how big the dot is, because you're just going to get 1 pixel of light. You actually spread that light out into a series of colors. You literally make a rainbow out of the 1 dot of light you get from the planet. And the colors that are present or absent in that rainbow of light tell you something about the planet. Okay? Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas because it traps in light that would otherwise escape to space, infrared light that the planet's emitting, that would otherwise go out to space. It gets absorbed by carbon dioxide and then radiated back down to the surface. Okay? Oxygen, the gas that I'm breathing in and all of you are breathing in right now, originally made by plants and algae, also absorbs certain wavelengths of light. Now those wavelengths of light are the ones that are coming into the atmosphere. And that oxygen, because it absorbs certain wavelengths of light, those wavelengths of light are missing from Earth's spectrum. You can see little dips in Earth's spectrum where oxygen absorbs photons. The colors that oxygen absorbs are absent from Earth's picture. It's part of the reason oxygen and ozone is part of the reason why Earth is blue. The other reason is the scattering of light in the atmosphere. But that means that if we can get a spectrum of light, we can look for that dip from oxygen and find out that oxygen is there. We can also look for gases like methane. We can look for water vapor. And when we put all those observations together, we can start to draw some conclusions. The reason is that oxygen and methane, if we can get them both especially, it's kind of like, well, high school students and pizza. Okay? If I go into a room with all of you and there's pizza there, I know someone just brought the pizza. Why? Because you're all going to eat it pretty quickly, okay? So I can figure out by the fact that you're in the same room as pizza that there's a pizza delivery place nearby. If I look at a planet and there's oxygen and methane in the atmosphere together, I know that someone just brought the oxygen in, someone just brought the methane because they destroy each other really rapidly. They consume each other, just as we all consume pizza really quickly, okay? So, and by the way, the only thing that can replenish, just as like the only way you get a lot of pizza to a place all at one time is you have a pizza restaurant nearby, the only way you can put a bunch of oxygen and methane into the atmosphere all at once is if you've got life making the oxygen and making the methane. So that's how we're going to do it. But there's a challenge. So the other thing that's happening when I was about your age is we, as an agency, were already announcing that we had found evidence of life on another world. We were announcing that there was evidence in these pictures and some geochemical data from a rock that was blasted off the surface of Mars by a meteor and eventually landed in Antarctica. There was evidence in that rock for life. Now I would say that most of the science community isn't convinced by that data and that evidence. And the reason is we've thought deeper about what it means to be, about the definition of life. And we've brought more different disciplines to bear on investigating the evidence from this rock. And the lesson I take from that isn't that we shouldn't try to look for life, but it's that when we look for life, we need to do it with as broad a community as possible. Okay, so that when we set our standards for claiming that oxygen and methane together in an atmosphere is evidence of life, that is done in the context not just of an astronomer or a planetary scientist, but also with biologists and chemists and heliophysicists and physicists on board as well, and chemists. And so what we need to do is we actually need to build a community of scientists. Not just a couple people on the spaceflight mission, but a broad community of scientists that can all participate in this and help set the standards together. And we're working on that as an agency. We're working with international partners all across the globe. But broader than that, even if I had the best science team in the world, even if I had the best science team in the history of the world, I still wouldn't be able to do this. Why? Because we wouldn't have any idea. We're not engineers. We don't know how to build space telescopes. Okay, so we actually need even a broader team than just the scientists can bring to bear. We need a great science team coupled with an incredible engineering team, which we've got incredible engineering at NASA. But we also need the people that make sure that our project, the spaceflight telescope, stays on budget. We need people making sure that we communicate the results of that to all of you, to the general public. We need people making sure that we archive the stuff we're doing so that future generations can learn from it. And I'm saying this in part because I know that there's like a quarterbacks for life thing, right? Anything you do at this scale that's this hard, whether it's sending humans to Mars or looking for life on another world, you need quarterbacks leading huge, diverse teams with different capabilities to be successful at that. And the other reason I'm saying it is often I talk to students like this and I'm like, yeah, get involved, right? And they all tell me, well, I'm not good at science. Okay? And I say two things in response to that. First, I say, I got a D in Earth history in college. And I ended up writing a PhD and a lot of papers on Earth history after that, okay? So there's a difference between being good at school science and being good at real science, all right? So if you got a bad grade, that doesn't mean you can't be a scientist, right? Just persevere. Keep your head in the books and get better at it, but maybe you just need to find your niche and how you interact with it. But the second thing is, even if you really aren't good at science, but you love this stuff, there's other ways to get involved. We need budget managers. We need engineers. As Administrator Bolden said, we need every kind of discipline there is within the STEM field. And lastly, this ties us back to the astronaut program. The largest, most ambitious versions of the missions that would look for evidence of life on another world are huge space telescopes that would not fit in any rocket. That means they'd have to be assembled on space. If that's where we end up, we're going to need astronauts working with robots most likely to put that telescope together. And even if we don't go that big, we're still going to want astronauts there servicing that telescope just like they did with Hubble. And so all of this stuff is that stuff isn't possible if the astronauts can't stay healthy in space. I'm not going to put an astronaut up there if I can't be assured of their safety. And so everything we do as an agency, it brings all these different skill sets together. So let me just close with this. I said, 20 years ago, I didn't know what was going on, but I had some ideas. I had some speculations and some thoughts. And it turns out I was able to get to a point where I can work on these missions now as someone that's gone through grad school and has a PhD and has some experience in the field. If this mission launches, if we go to Mars, if we do these big, ambitious things, they're going to take some time. So by the time they happen, by the time we set human footprints on Mars, by the time we build a space telescope that could look for signs of life on another world, you're going to be my age. You could have gone through college and grad school. You could have written a bunch of papers. You could have been a scientist or an engineer or a manager on one of these missions. And I kind of hope you are, because I know there's a lot of talent in this room and watching us on TV that we'd like to be a part of this enterprise. So thank you very much, and if we have time, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Domagal-Goldman. So again, if you'd like to ask questions, ask that you raise your hand and someone will bring a mic to you. Any questions?
Did you know at the time that you were sitting there with your brother and looking at the stars that you wanted to get involved in a field in science or something in the science field?
So I think I knew, but I don't think I really knew. So when I was talking to my brother, I knew I liked science, and at that point I wanted to be a physicist, is what I'd kind of envisioned. But then I went to college. And when I got to college, I was actually a religious studies major for a little bit. I was an English major for a little bit. It was partially because my wife, well, the woman that ended up my wife was an English major. So I took some English classes for a little bit. Turned out I ended up majoring in physics, and when I was in college studying physics and reading some books actually about sending humans to Mars is when I really became interested in the search for life on other planets. Because that's one of the key science things that humans would do on Mars is looking for evidence of life, either living, most likely extinct life on the ancient Martian surface is one of the things astronauts could be doing. And that science, looking at Martian exploration, got me interested in astrobiology, and I've been thinking about that ever since. So I knew then, I thought I knew, I kind of moved around a little bit in college and studied, explored some different things, but then I ended up in science again. And you can explore. I tell students that are working with me, if they're undergraduates, don't, explore some other areas of life, explore some other things that you could study other than just science and engineering, because you're going to be better off for it. And even if you stay in science, you're going to be better off for it in the long run if you can put it in the context of the humanities and the social sciences.
Other questions?
Do you think that we will ever look for life in other galaxies instead of just the Milky Way?
I think so the question, for those that couldn't hear, is will we look for life in other galaxies? There are some people that are talking about doing that. That's going to be even harder. You couldn't do it with the techniques that I'm talking about. I think that's the type of thing that if I get the mission I was just talking about, and we get to do that and we find some evidence of life in other worlds, that's when your generation of scientists coming up behind me, or maybe the generation behind you, would start thinking about, oh, how do we do this for other galaxies? So I think it's possible. We're not talking about doing it right now, but if we're successful here, I think you'd start to hear some thinking on how we might do it there. It would be way harder to do. It'd be way harder to do.
Other questions?
Do you know of any other telescopes that could be historic as other ones were?
So the telescope you're going to see today, so Hubble is I think the best telescope we've ever built. It's just revolutionized our thinking of where we are in the galaxy and where we are in the cosmos. Kepler's amazing. All these things are outstanding. James Webb, the James Webb Space Telescope, which you're all going to see today, that's going to give us the best eyes we've ever had on the earliest parts of the universe. And I think 10 years from now, people are going to be talking about James Webb as one of the greatest things we've ever done as a species, just as we talk about the moon landing and we talk about Hubble being some of the great things that we've done. Then we're going to have a mission called WFIRST right now, and that's also going to look at, if you've ever looked at news magazines that talk about dark matter and dark energy and this thing we can't figure out, we don't know what it is, the next one after JWST is called WFIRST. It's going to look at that. That's also going to be pretty awesome. And then the next one after that is, we don't know yet, but some of the options are these telescopes I was talking about today. We don't know if these are going to happen. We're actually studying how hard it would be to do this. I'm telling you how I think it would be done, but we actually have teams of scientists and engineers that are currently exploring how difficult it would be. And then the science community is going to decide whether it's too difficult or not.
A question up front.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think we'll have enough money and resources to make the next telescope that discovers life beyond Earth?
So that's a great question. And the way I view this, so I am your servant, okay? I'm a civil servant, all right? I work for the government works for you. The way I view this is, and the way this works, is I can put together a plan for, if you want to do that, how it would be done. We work with engineers that help design a mission around that say, okay, here's your science questions, Shawn. We're going to build a mission that's going to answer those science questions. We have people that figure out, that estimate how much that would cost once they have those designs from the engineering team. And then we send those off. I'm not going to make that call, okay? That's not going to be my decision. We actually send that off to the National Academy of Sciences, right? They're commissioned by Congress. And the National Academy of Sciences is going to put together a panel of experts from all over the United States, the best scientific minds from across the country. And they're going to make that call. They're going to say, based on the budget we have, is this worth doing, or should we put our priorities somewhere else? And then once that panel of scientists makes that call, they'll come back to me and they'll say, Shawn, go execute whatever mission that we ended up deciding to fly, right? There's other missions that we could do instead. It could be like one that looks at the disks around other stars and like the coldest parts of the universe. There's one that could look at the highest energy parts of the universe and the X-ray, like huge explosions that happen. And there's essentially two versions of this kind of mission. And at some point, and there's also the gravity wave stuff, right? That's been huge in the news lately, a mission that could look at gravity waves. Something like that is most likely to happen, and we'll adjust what we're doing to whatever budget we're given. But what budget we're given is determined by people way beyond my control. So I know that's not answering your question exactly, but I mean, my role in all this is to do the best job I can with whatever budget we're given.
Any last questions? Gentlemen up front.
What do you think the chances are of me or one of the students in this room to be one of the first people to step on Mars?
Well, it's certainly something like 1 in a few billion, right? Because there's only going to be one, right? So even if everything goes according to plan, there's going to be that one person or that one crew that's the first one to be there. That said, okay, if we do this right, we'll do it in a sustainable way where we could have multiple crews going to the surface over time. And no matter when it happens, no matter who ends up being on the surface first, this is why I was making that point at the end. The enterprise to get humans to the surface of Mars is so incredibly broad, right? We're going to need not just the astronauts, we're going to need the scientists that are training them how to pick samples, the engineers building the telescopes, the people purchasing the parts. How many parts do you think are in a vehicle that would land on the surface of Mars, right? So someone has to figure out how to order those parts and who to order them from, and how to make sure that the parts when they come are the right parts and that they work properly. So, and I'm not saying that to discourage you, right? But that's like asking me, what are the chances that you could be the quarterback on the winning Super Bowl team in a few years, right? Like it's possible, right? It's possible. But here's and the other thing I say is shoot for it, regardless of the odds. Shoot for it, because first of all, we need the best, brightest minds in every part of that enterprise and every part of the NASA enterprise and the stuff that we do. And even if you don't end up being that first astronaut, even if you're only the second astronaut on the surface of Mars, or even if you're only one of the people that's helping make that happen, I still think that's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Domagal-Goldman. Now, without further ado, it is time for our student team presentations. Our first school is Altoona Area High School. We will have Hannah Cayley, Emil Lozinski, and Bailey Stout.
Good morning. My name is Emily Lozinski, and I am here with Bailey Stout and Hannah Cayley. We are thankful to NASA, the Beating the Odds Foundation, the Quarterbacks of Life, and founder Rocco Scalzi. Additionally, we would like to send out a special thanks to our teachers, Mrs. Quinn, Mrs. Stoltz, and Mr. Krug. We are here today to speak as the voice for our leadership team called CLIP. or the Community Learning Interdisciplinary Program of Altoona Area High School of Altoona, Pennsylvania?
536. 536 people have been sent into space. Each one of these individuals started with a dream. From these dreams, they formulated goals. From these goals came achievements, and from these achievements came miraculous discoveries and findings that helped mankind tremendously improve our knowledge of outer space. The success did not come easy. Instead, it required a significant amount of time, effort, and energy. Similarly, the Beating the Odds Foundation recognizes 5 stepping stones to success that we can use in our everyday lives.
Stepping stone number 1 is dreams and goals. All 536 of these brave men and women's achievements started as daydreaming, as every single one of us do. Though daydreaming is discouraged in the classroom, dreaming is one of the most important stepping stones to achieving success. Goals are created by dreams. Some of us begin with immense goals, such as wanting to become a doctor or a surgeon. Other students may start small, such as having a goal simply to get out of bed on time in the morning. No matter what size, every goal achieved is progress, and every bit of progress is very important. NASA started as a small dream to learn more about the mysteries of space and our solar system. Bill Nye was once quoted as saying, "NASA is an engine of innovation and inspiration, as well as our world's premier space exploration agency." NASA has only begun with our innovations. NASA's Twin Study is a bridge towards further exploration and possible habitations of space.
Stepping stone number 2 recognizes a need for self-awareness and a closer look at available resources. With help from the Human Research Program, NASA is capable of further researching mankind's ability to live and to travel into space. This program's goal is to find the best technologies and methods to support a safe, productive human space travel. To achieve this goal, NASA employed astronaut twin brothers Scott and Mark Kelly. Astronaut Scott Kelly spent almost a year in space while Mark remained on Earth. Using identical twin brothers with similar genetic makeup, NASA is capable of testing the effects of space on the human mind and body. These brothers served as rare test subjects that allowed NASA to perform many experiments that were once thought impossible. Effectively, they have become invaluable resources used to explore the response of the human body while subjected to extended periods of time in space.
Stepping stone number 3 focuses on team support. Success cannot be achieved all on your own. Difficulties are found on every road to success. With a dream to explore, NASA continues to investigate each mission to achieve its success as a team. The idea of teamwork and success echoes in the words of Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company. Ford once said, "Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success." Success is not something that is easy to master. One of the many reasons NASA's success is possible is through the extensive resources and support that they have behind them. NASA's team includes many very well-educated people. They have the top scientists in the world, along with many dedicated researchers, technicians, engineers, and programmers.
Stepping stone number 4 requires the team to decide and plan. Approaching this mission, NASA faced many success stoppers, while Scott risked possible dangers and regulations during his stay in the International Space Station. NASA's team of researchers reviewed 15 years of previous studies on the International Space Station, coupled with the challenges that they were going to face. Through careful planning, the international teams determined how to overcome them. For example, the Human Research Program found that due to the large decrease in gravity, the body does not work nearly as hard in space as on Earth. The physical activity with weightlessness results in muscle weakening, bone loss, and reduction in cardiovascular conditioning. To conquer this obstacle, the Human Research team developed IRAT, also known as Integrated Resistance and Aerobic Training Study. The study developed the perfect exercises training routine and schedule to prevent a decline in physical health.
Additionally, according to NASA's Omics-related research, NASA created appropriate countermeasures to safeguard future astronauts against stress of space to the human body. Omics-related research is aiding in treatment for cancer patients. Perhaps one day, such tests may be for everyone in a clinical setting, such as doctors' offices and hospitals. Finally, stepping stone number 5 requires a positive mental attitude. Our Altoona Area High School leadership team recognizes daily the importance of maintaining a positive outlook for now and for our future. We have worked with and watched members of our family, our school, and our community strive through financial and family hardships, pain and disease, neglect and failure. Yet, we keep in mind the words of John F. Kennedy, as he noted in his Rice Stadium Moon speech. We have had our failures, but so have others, even if they do not admit them. Kennedy's plan was for the space program to advance.
With that being said, the great national effort of the United States of America, 54 years later, NASA's twin study echoes the accomplishments of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. After landing on the moon, Neil Armstrong was quoted as saying, "This is one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Much like standing on the moon was once thought to be an impossibility, so was the concept of sending humans to space for extended periods of time. However, through dreams and goals, self-awareness and resources, team support, decision-making and planning, and maintenance of a positive mental attitude, NASA has once again achieved success. Through determination and successful planning of NASA's twin study, astronauts Scott and Mark Kelly and the entire NASA team can quote from Kennedy as he concluded his speech. "Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure in which man has ever embarked." Thank you.
Thank you, Altoona Area High School. Next up is Carmichael's Junior Senior High School with students Sierra Hedrick, Caleb Wilson, and Caitlin Rico. Welcome.
In life, people face many obstacles and challenges which can impede their movement towards their dreams and goals. No matter who you are, where you live, or what your dreams are, challenges and obstacles are inevitable. NASA and their human research program are well aware of this fact. They have faced many challenges along their journey to achieve their goal in producing new technology which can help mankind survive in and even perhaps colonize the rest of the universe. To do this, NASA has utilized the 5 stepping stones of success. These stepping stones are dreams and goals, self-awareness, resource review and development, team support and plan, and positive mental attitude. The 5 stepping stones to success can be performed in any order that best suits the situation and are oftentimes performed more than once. It may seem silly to think that NASA utilizes such a simple process, but the truth is that everyone uses these stepping stones throughout the course of their lifetime. Every great journey, no matter the subject, starts with a dream and a set of goals. The importance of dreams and goals are emphasized in the first stepping stone to success. A dream gives a vision of a grand future, which can serve as motivation to overcome daunting success stoppers, which can pose a major danger to one's success. Famous British Prime Minister Winston Churchill once said, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." With courage, a strong will, and a plan for success, any and all challenges are surmountable. In order to overcome success stoppers, the Human Research Program was started to research the effects of space on the human body. There are 6 different elements of the HRP: International Space Station Medical Project, Space Radiation, Human Health Countermeasure, Exploration Medical Capability, Behavioral Health and Performance, and Space Human Factors and Habitability. The HRP has filled numerous challenges in their attempts to create new technology to assist their astronauts, first and foremost. They had to develop a plan for their research. This may sound like a simple first step in an arduous journey, but there is no way the case. In fact, constituting a plan made the most difficult part of the process, including the twin study. NASA decided that in order to achieve the most accurate comparison possible, they needed 2 astronauts who should, biologically, be the same. To do this, NASA chose a pair of astronauts who are identical twins, Mark and Scott Kelly. Since they had the same genetic makeup, one of the twins, Mark, would remain on Earth, while the other, Scott, would spend 340 days on the International Space Station.
They do all this because humans are very complex beings. Our bodies require nourishment and protection from harmful environmental factors. This means that the scientists in charge of the health and safety of these astronauts are absolutely vital. Their challenges range from providing efficient meals to protecting the human body from radiation. Being in space has many adverse effects on the human body. This makes it hard for both the astronauts and the human research teams in charge of providing care for them. Human research teams have to be able to predict unfavorable occurrences that may occur, and these occurrences are complicated at the best of times. When theories and experiments fail, it can be discouraging. However, each failure is simply one step closer to success. Failures give us information on what we should avoid doing in the future, as well as new tests we may want to try. If everything was an immediate success, nothing would be learned and nothing would be improved. Author Janet Fitch once said, "The phoenix must burn to emerge." This is an important mental outlook to have because nearly everything in this world is achieved through trial and error. So do we simply lie down when faced with challenges that may seem insurmountable? Well, did the colonists lie down when the British Army threatened them? Did Martin Luther King Jr. lie down when he was constantly battered and belittled by racists? Did NASA lie down when they faced initial failure and pressure from the Soviets and even the American public to be the first organization to put a man on the moon? No, absolutely not. Not as individuals, not as a nation, but as mankind, must face challenges, fight against them with all of our might, and overcome them. So what if it's hard? You don't need to tell people that it is hard. Everybody knows that it is hard because life is hard. If life was easy, there would be no value in it, and nothing in this universe is more valuable than life. We are not defined by what we have done. We are defined by what we have overcome. So while success stoppers are unavoidable, they are what give us the strength to continue. They encourage us to fight for better times, and continue to fight when we have little will left to do so. They push us to continually search for the light, and they constantly remind us that there can be no light without darkness. Thank you.
Middle Senior High School. Next up is Fraser Middle High School with Ava Kinney and Avery Matthews. Welcome.
Good morning. The 5 stepping stones of success are used daily by everyday people across the world. NASA's commitment to the stepping stones has led to the success of the twin study conducted this past year.
For this program to become reality, NASA had a dream. Their goal is to eventually put the first humans on Mars. In order to achieve this goal, NASA sent Scott Kelly into space for an entire year while his identical twin brother Mark Kelly stayed on Earth. This experiment showed the differences between space and body in Earth. For example, Scott Kelly aged differently. He grew 2 inches and his organs shifted in his body. NASA showed us with the right mindset and approach, any goal is attainable.
As NASA becomes aware of the challenges it faces, it can develop resources and create solutions to make space travel as safe and productive as possible. The effects of space on your body include loss of bone mass, having possible fractures post-mission, as well as increasing your motion sickness and impacting hand-eye coordination. NASA uses self-awareness to gain forward movement toward dream and goal achievement.
Teamwork is an essential part of an operation. Without it, nothing would be accomplished in an effective manner. With everyone working together, we may never have known what effects a year in space has on the human body. That's why the twin study is a crucial development in NASA's mission to Mars. There are many people that work together to make the dream of putting humans to Mars a reality. There were teams of NASA personnel dedicated to each Mark and Scott Kelly to the preparation, care, and ongoing observation of the Kelly brothers.
Without the decision to go through with this mission and the extensive planning conducted by the NASA organization, this mission would have ended at the thought of, we can't do this. NASA experts were able to predict the concerns that Scott Kelly would encounter in space. NASA then prepared the appropriate tests to keep him safe. For example, actigraphy, LED technology, and journals were put into the planning process and were used to monitor Scott Kelly in space.
One of the reasons Scott Kelly was picked for this mission was his determination and willpower to succeed, which contributed to a positive mental attitude. Being isolated in space for that period of time may result in behavioral changes. Conclusions drawn from research show that isolation from other humans and stress from other situations can lead to a negative effect on the human mind. The 5th stepping stone is not only applied to space travel, but can be used in the average high schooler's everyday life.
Through our experience through the Quarterbacks of Life program, we truly understand the meaning of these 5 stepping stones. They play a crucial role in the NASA space missions just as they do in our everyday lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Fraser Middle and High School. Next up is Mapletown Senior High School, with R.J. Durr and Kaylee Wagner. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Kaylee, and this is RJ. And when we researched the twin study, we focused on the stepping stones and how they were incorporated.
So the first stepping stone is dream and goal. This mission started with a dream of sending a man to Mars for the first time. For this dream to be impossible, they sent Scott Kelly into space for over a year, or under a year, sorry. And they tested the health effects that would be happened onto his body to further explanations. This dream branches out to hopefully have the ability to someday soon travel to Mars and later planets while keeping the astronauts safe and healthy.
Stepping stone 2, self-awareness. Self-awareness has a great impact on one's goal. NASA was lucky enough to find 2 twin astronauts with the same genetics so that they could send one in space and one on Earth and do the same studies on them to further research. They also had research from past missions that they could incorporate in this mission and future missions.
Stepping stone 3 is team support. Team support has an immense impact on whether a mission can be successful or a failure. NASA has people who are working on the study, who are the study, which is Scott and Mark Kelly, and who are funding the study. If one of these studies were not, or one of these groups were not able to be in the study, then this study would not be possible.
Stepping stone 4, decide and plan. Once NASA had a dream, they made a goal, and they realized the resources they had to make a decision and plan. They chose 4 areas of focus: human physiology, behavioral health, microbiology, microbiome, and omics studies. They also planned to use identical twins, and they would both receive the same test while one was on Earth and one was in space.
Stepping stone number 5 is positive mental attitude. A positive mental attitude is very important when facing the challenges throughout the study, such as the health effects that could happen while in space. Little is known about being in space, so keeping a positive mental attitude can keep a team moving forward and keeping their eyes on the big picture. This study would be impossible if the NASA could not follow the 5 stepping stones that they have followed.
These stepping stones, they're not just used in big corporations like NASA. They can also be used in our lives as students. Ever since we were little, people asked us what we wanted to be when we were older, but they never really said how to get there. They just told us to have big dreams. Well, you can use all these 5 stepping stones. First, you start out with your dream, and then you realize that you have teachers and parents to help you. Then you apply for college and scholarships, and etc. And you work together with those who care about you and support you.
Where's my juniors and seniors in here? Raise your hand. How many of you know where you're going to school at? So there's very little of you that know where you're going to school at. You guys can follow these 5 stepping stones to know what major you're going to and what school you want to go to by the resources that you have throughout life and the people that can help you get there.
Our personal experience, we come from a very small school, just like some of you, but we have less resources, less opportunities, than people who come from bigger schools. But we still have our dreams and our goals, and we work with our teachers and our parents, and we apply for college. We've taken our tests, and we apply for scholarships. RJ, what do you want to be when you're older?
Dual major in engineering for 5 years.
And I want to study international business. And we know exactly how we're going to get there by following these steps. Thank you for listening.
Mapletown Junior Senior High School. Next up is Bellwood Antis Middle School, and we have Maggie Erickson and Seamus Salmon. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Maggie Erickson.
And my name is Seamus Salmon.
We are members of the Bellwood Antis Middle School leadership team.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present to you. So what is the twin study?
Stepping Stone 1, Dreams and Goals. NASA's dream is to safely keep human beings in space for an extended period of time, and our dream is to work together to understand NASA's twin study. NASA's goal is to see how long a human can stay in space and the effects space has on the human body over an extended period of time.
Stepping Stone 2, Self-Awareness, Resource Review, and Development. NASA forms teams by using their own evidence to choose dedicated and hardworking people that work together with different skills. As the leadership team, we used internet articles, video clips, newspaper articles, television news reports, and prior knowledge to be successful in our study.
Stepping stone 3, team support. A good team includes reliable and educated people who are determined and dedicated to their work. NASA's team includes 10 individual studies, 12 universities, NASA's biomedical laboratories, and National Space Biomedical Research Institute Consortium. Team support is essential to be successful. Our team included the assistance of Mr. Rocco Scalzi, Mr. Terry Treast, Ms. Forshey, Mrs. Nickham, and our fellow leadership members.
Stepping stone 4, decide and plan. To make long-term space travel safer for humans, NASA decided they needed to study the effects on the human body, determine possible obstacles for astronauts, and determine how many tests needed to be conducted. For this research, NASA needed a plan. NASA needed to plan how long humans can safely stay in space, what possible side effects may occur due to being in space for an extended period of time, how to prevent side effects from occurring, supplies that will be needed to assist astronauts, and how much exercise an astronaut requires to stay healthy.
Our leadership team needed to decide which team members were going to research a particular section, what information to record, and what information to include in our presentation. Our plan was to discover why NASA was conducting the twin study, discover the effects of space on the human body, and figure out medical risks of being in space for a long period of time.
Stepping stone 5, positive mental attitude. NASA's setbacks include mechanical difficulties, food resources, psychiatric and physical health issues, radiation, and lack of technical devices. They stay positive through team support and resolve their issues through research. NASA takes success stoppers and changes them to improve themselves to reach their goals of making space travel safer.
We struggled with finding time to work on the twin study and working together as a team to accomplish our goals, but we stayed positive by thinking that things could always be worse. Kicking out negative thoughts also helped us to succeed when we were discouraged. Allowing others to help and encourage us made us realize that it was all going to be worth it in the end.
What has our team learned about success? Everyone knows and jokes about the proverb, if at first you don't succeed, try again. But how true it is. NASA has had many setbacks, however, they refuse to give up. They go back to the drawing board and figure out where the failure was and make changes to improve their study. They continue to rely on their resources and team when it comes to deciding what to change and how to plan their new strategies. And no matter what, they keep a positive mental attitude.
Our lives parallel NASA's study. We have dreams and goals. We need to look at our resources to see who or what can help us succeed. We know that we need to surround ourselves with positive people who will support us, and to always remember to keep a positive mental attitude no matter what happens in our lives.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bellwood Antis Middle School. Next up is Hollidaysburg Area Junior High School with students Derek Kaplan and Olivia Snyder. Welcome.
Hollidaysburg Area School District and the Hollidaysburg Area Junior High would like to thank NASA in beating the odds for this opportunity.
Our team researched NASA's success in space and the twin study with Scott and Mark Kelly. We examined the emotional and physical changes that occur when astronauts spend extended amounts of time in space.
We found some astronauts struggle living within the confined spaces of the International Space Station. Seeing the Earth at a distance and thinking of loved ones far away can cause emotional distress as well.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. We also researched physical changes astronauts experience in space. Breakdown in bone density is a concern that must be addressed as astronauts spend more and more time in space. Astronauts must exercise daily in space to rebuild the bone density that is lost more rapidly in space. Next slide. Another major physical change is that astronauts experience is the shift of fluid in their bodies. Approximately 2 meters of fluid move from the lower extremities to the head in space. This fluid change could contribute to visual changes that astronauts experience in space?
As part of our research on vision changes in astronauts, we dissected cow eyes. We examined the anatomy of the eye and were surprised how much fluid is actually contained in the mammal's eye.
Next slide.
We also spent time as a team looking at how students can achieve success at school and in life. We learned that success is the process of moving forward toward your dreams and goals. As students, we have many resources available to us, including teachers, guidance counselors, and our parents to help us achieve success. We also learned that things in our environment can impact whether or not we are successful. We spent time as a team discussing friendships and the role of technology in our lives.
Success stoppers are things that interfere with our ability to be successful. When thinking about other junior high students, we decided to discuss two common success stoppers: lack of sleep and lack of confidence. If a student is experiencing lack of sleep, he could change his routine to go to bed earlier. Some students experience difficulty sleeping after using technology, so reading a book may help.
If a student is lacking confidence, she should surround herself with caring and supportive people. Practice makes perfect, so spending time doing what you want to achieve is important for success.
Next slide. We spent time exploring famous role models who overcame success stoppers to overcome their dreams and goals. Albert Einstein struggled in school as a child, but he overcame his difficulties and became a genius.
Walt Disney was rejected from many companies due to lack of creativity and imagination, but kept persevering and eventually became the owner of one of the biggest companies in the world.
Next slide. Next slide. We enjoyed our time working on this project and learning from people who have achieved success.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Hollidaysburg Area Junior High School. Next up is South Park Senior High School with Shannon Brines and Amara Holine. Welcome.
Begin the slide. On April 12, 2016, at the 32nd Space Symposium, NASA Administrator Charles Bolden was quoted as saying, "If you think about it, as long as little boys and girls have been climbing trees, they've dreamed about things yet unseen and undiscovered. And as for as long as human beings have known about Mars, we've dreamed about going there. As NASA strives to reach Mars, us students strive to be successful like NASA." Next slide. Success is a process of self-improvement that leads to forward movement in the direction of one's dreams and goals. Inside the NASA program, they use the stepping stones of success to achieve their goals. Dreams and goals are what a group wants to achieve. With the team's dreams and goals in mind, the impossible becomes possible. This is the first step that helps a team become motivated to work hard and achieve success. Self-awareness is where a team analyzes their goals and assesses success stoppers and how they can be avoided. Success stoppers are obstacles that could potentially stop anyone from achieving success. Team support is necessary for groups to reach their goals. Like the saying goes, there is no I in team, which is why having team support is important in achieving success. Teams also need to decide and plan when and how they are going to achieve their goals. Without deciding and planning, valuable resources and time could be wasted. Having a positive mental attitude is key. Without a positive mental attitude, the team's rate of success is lowered and is counterproductive. Having a positive mental attitude enables the team to continue moving forward towards success.
When students identify their dreams and goals, it makes success easier to achieve. However, success isn't as easy to achieve as it sounds. At each stage of life, there are different ways to achieve success. At the age of 4, success is going to preschool without crying for your mom. At our age, it's about passing all of our classes. And at NASA, it's about developing new space technology and achieving a mission to Mars with help from research from the twin study. The road to success is never easy. Success stoppers can be anything from failing a test, lack of motivation, or falling into the peer pressure of drugs and alcohol. With the help of support systems, students can overcome these success stoppers. A positive mental attitude within a student's support system is useful in achieving success. Without this, a student can get overwhelmed and will want to quit on their goals.
The human research, next slide. The Human Research Program's main goal is to find out how space travel affects the human body so humans can eventually reach Mars. They also have the goal of enabling astronauts to safely live longer in space and provide appetizing and nutritious food for them. The twin study is a study of how space affects the body of Scott Kelly by being compared to his twin brother, Mark Kelly. The one-year mission is American astronaut Scott Kelly and Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko staying in space for about 1 year. This is a very important mission because it is twice as long as the usual International Space Station trip. With this mission being about a year long, the results on medical, physiological, and biomedical challenges will aid in the possibility of humans going to Mars and how life on Earth can be improved.
Next slide. Students can look up to NASA and see how it is successful. The twin study and the one-year mission are necessary steps in NASA's dream to reach Mars. A few results have already been found from these studies, such as some human limitations like vision loss, bone degradation, factors affecting aging, muscle and bone atrophy, plant life in space, brain-to-body function, and understanding how the body reacts to microgravity in space. Vision problems were one of the most relevant problems for Scott Kelly. Upon his arrival home, he underwent a lengthy testing procedure that included a vision test, which showed that his eyesight had decreased while in space. This research is important for future projects. We can use these success stoppers and find creative ways to fix them in the future. Next slide. The NASA project has taught us a lot as a group. We now have a better understanding of success and how we can achieve it in our own lives. The research we have done relates to issues that not only astronauts would go through, but also everyday people, including us students.
Leigh Brown once said, next slide. Leigh Brown once said, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss it, you will land among the stars. We have come to the conclusion that NASA is on the right track and that you should set your dreams higher than the moon and reach for Mars. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Hollidaysburg Area Junior High School. South Park Senior High School. Next up is the Washington Senior High School with Daniel Geisy and Amira Murolis. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm proud to represent Washington High School and to present to you the research we've conducted on the now famous Kelly twins. May I see my slides, please? Thank you. Next slide. Goals. It is the dream of NASA and humanity to visit new planets in our vast galaxy, Mars being the goal right now. A real problem, however, is the effects and setbacks on the human body in a zero-gravity environment. A major focus was astronaut Scott Kelly, the American to survive the longest in space. Next slide. Effects on the body in space. Our study kept track of bone metabolism, oxidative damage, and hormonal changes, and sight impairment. Humans are more susceptible to things like viruses and muscle weaknesses in space. Our study focused on Scott Kelly, the American who has been in space longest. Exercise in space. Much exercise is needed in space to ensure that your muscles do not become fragile and bones do not break easily in the future. Exercise devices such as resistance bands, exercise bikes, and treadmills are used in space. They're specially engineered, of course, so astronauts don't float away while working out. Here are some of the exercises.
Cool. I think they deserve a round of applause. Okay, next slide. We also looked at nutrition in space. Food in space has evolved tremendously throughout the years, of course. Gone from applesauce in tubes at one point in time to now hot meals that can be prepared in minutes. Vegetables like potatoes and such have also been sustained in space and grown there. So we can have a sustainable food source in space in such 2-year missions to Mars. Of course, nutrition in space is just as important as nutrition on Earth, so most of it's pretty much the same. Some recommended foods are fish, vegetables, and, as always, water. Next slide. Specific effects on the body, vision problems. Worsening in vision in astronauts has been reported by NASA's astronauts since 1989. However, due to not having the knowledge, we never always knew what caused them. Recently, though, it's been discovered that they were the cause of fluid shift phenomenon. Now, fluid shift phenomenon is caused by a lack of gravity on the human body. The human body relies on gravity to keep its fluids where it should be while on Earth. But of course, in space, we don't have gravity, so that doesn't always work out. So, NASA has been conducting research into the fluid shift phenomenon starting in March 2015, planning to end in March of 2017. So we don't have the results just yet, but we're working on it. Next slide. Viruses in space. A study by NASA scientists saw that some latent viruses may be reactivated by the stress of space flight. One such well-known example was the herpes virus. Active viruses in space can be prevented by quarantining crew members for a period of time before launch. However, latent viruses aren't detected like that, so it's not going to work. The crowded conditions of spaceflight can lead to easy spreading of active viruses, so if latent viruses become active in spaceflight, they're likely to be spread throughout the crew. So NASA needs to work on that and prevent that from stopping the Mars mission. Next slide. All right, let's talk about some dreams and goals here. NASA's dream is to go to Mars. That is our dream right now. The twin study is a stepping stone to that dream. We're conducting health research that will allow us to eventually get to Mars. The next stepping stone to success, as I'm sure you all know by now, is self-awareness and resource review. NASA doesn't have a lot of resources. They are government funded, and as we all know, the government is not good right now. And just like NASA, our team didn't have a surplus amount of resources. Due to certain problems, we had a low amount of class time, and we didn't always get to work together, and there weren't a lot of students who wanted to be involved in it. But in the end, we managed to make it through. Next stepping stone, team support. NASA has a huge team of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, everyone in the STEM field working together to get to Mars. And just like them, we had a team of active members in our group to make this presentation for you all, despite all the setbacks. Next is decide and plan. NASA has been deciding and planning this mission for years, and they're still going. It hasn't happened yet, and we're just working on stepping stones. Finally is positive mental attitude. NASA has a team of dedicated supporters for this. Everyone wants us to get to Mars, and they will do their best to get there. Just as our team wanted this presentation, there wasn't a single day in class that we didn't all want to be there and work on this project. And now here we are. We've gone through several setbacks, as previously stated, the lack of class time and having to reformat the PowerPoint 2 weeks ago. Thanks for that. But here we are. We've done it. So I'd like to thank the Beating the Odds Foundation, Mr. Scalzi, for allowing us to come here today and letting us work on this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Margaret Bell Miller Middle School with Luca Augustine, Hayden Church, Jonah Higley, and Olivia San Vicente. Welcome.
Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Morning. Quarterbacks of life define success as a process of self-improvement and forward movement in the directions of your dreams and goals. Throughout the year, we have been working to reach our dream and goal of creating a paper to present at NASA. As we worked, we developed our own definition of success. For us, success involved researching, writing, and discussing in order to find ways to improve our final product and learn about NASA's HRP twin study. Our process also included studying NASA's definition of success for the HRP, which was to discover the best methods and technologies to safely reach Mars and beyond. Improved methods of data collection, problem solving, emergency response, and health maintenance were also studied. NASA had to manage assets and form national and international collaborations. NASA also wanted to engage and educate the public concerning the challenges of human space travel.
Stepping Stone 2 involves self-awareness, resource review, and development. One of the most important resources NASA had was the set of identical twin astronauts, Scott and Mark Kelly. On March 27, 2015, NASA sent astronaut Scott Kelly and cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko to the International Space Station aboard Expedition 43. Scott Kelly's brother Mark Kelly remained on Earth as the control subject so scientists could study and compare the effects of long-term space travel on the human body. These identical twin astronauts were useful to NASA in this project because they have few genetic differences. When Scott returned on March 1, 2016, NASA began the comparison between Scott and Mark. Another important resource was the international community. Some countries NASA worked with are Russia, Canada, Japan, Germany, France, and Italy. When doing our research, we had many resources as well, including the internet, the NASA website, and YouTube. Both our team and NASA used our resources to achieve success and overcome success stoppers.
Next slide, please. On your journey to success, you will often encounter success stoppers which will require team support. Together, everyone achieves more is the quarterbacks of life definition for team support. With the support of the HRP and NASA teams, Scott and Mikhail, as well as various other astronauts throughout the year, were able to complete their missions successfully. Our team also encountered success stoppers such as lack of time and absence of team members at various times. But whenever we all were together, we were able to support and encourage each other to create this presentation. In order to reach your dream or goal, you need to have a team, which could be your family, friends, teachers, or communities. They help you get through the success stoppers.
As is with every stepping stone, Stepping Stone 4, Decide and Plan, is a key player in success. One of the most important decisions NASA had to make was to use identical twins for the project. Another decision NASA had to make was which medical tests to run on astronauts Scott and Mark Kelly to determine the effects of long-term space travel on the human body. These tests investigated human physiology, behavioral health, microbiology, and molecular and omics. Just like NASA, we had to decide and plan to achieve success. Our dream was to create a presentation and travel to NASA to present it. We had to set our goal of finishing this project and committing to a realistic deadline by which to complete it. We had to decide which websites to use and what job each team member would do. In addition to the research our team conducted into the HRP, we had to make many strategic decisions and do extensive planning. Once this was done, our next goal was to collate all our information into a cohesive paper.
To complete the QBOL definition of reaching our dreams and goals, we needed to have positive mental attitudes, which is the fifth stepping stone of success. When faced with challenges or success stoppers in life, a positive mental attitude is key to overcoming them. For example, when NASA supply ships, like the Falcon 9 rocket, failed to reach the ISS, both astronauts on the ISS and support personnel at NASA headquarters had to maintain positive mental attitudes in the eye of defeat. That assisted them in preparing a new supply ship that would succeed in reaching the ISS. Our team also had to stay positive in our classroom at Waynesburg. Our biggest success stopper was time, but the little time we had was spent planning, researching, and writing this report, and a positive mental attitude motivated us to produce a final product that would display the effort we put into this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Abraham Lincoln High School with Megan Curry, Shania Fletcher, Nick Keenan, Abraham Zarillo, Malachi Whitner Carson, Craig Smith, and William Wu. Welcome.
Next slide, please. Next one. Thank you. Gravity must be caused by an ancient acting constantly occurring to certain laws. But whether these ancient be material or immaterial, I have left the consideration of my readers. Sir Isaac Newton said these words.
Next slide. In space, astronauts experience microgravity, a condition in which people or objects appear to be weightless. NASA states the effects of microgravity is a condition in which astronauts and objects float in space. Micro means very small, so microgravity refers to gravity feeling very small.
Next slide. Technically, gravity exists everywhere in the universe because it is defined as the force that attracts two bodies together, Newton's law of universal gravitation. However, in space, astronauts don't feel that they are attracted towards the Earth. They experience weightlessness. The sensation of weightlessness causes several key systems of the human body to relax, as it is no longer fighting against the pull of gravity. Astronauts in microgravity lack a sense of up or down perceive the vestibular system. Spacecraft are consequently designed with labels on their interior walls, all pointing in the same direction. Psychological stress is produced by the confinement in a small space with others for an extended period of time. Some of the symptoms of these psychological impressions would be the following: initial anxiety due to the absence of gravity, senses functioning with extreme intensity, time appearing to move more slowly, a unique intensity to pain, feelings of displeasure. Next.
Some of the recorded effects of microgravity on the eyes include a drop of an angle of view from 10 degrees to 15 degrees. Visual impairment is due to intracranial pressure, a result of an increased amount of fluid in the brain. This increased pressure on the backs of the eyeballs affects their shape, slightly crushing the optic nerve. Next slide.
Another effect on the increased upper body fluid retention is that the face looks puffy and swollen. Upon entering the microgravity environment, the fluid is immediately redistributed to the upper body, resulting in bulging neck veins, puffy face, sinuses, and nasal congestions. These effects last throughout the remainder of the trip. It's very likely to be a symptom of a cold. Next slide, please.
While in a weightless environment, a human's height would be affected by microgravity. Because of the lack of gravity, there is no longer any pressure placed on the human spine, and as a result, the vertebral column would stretch and a human's height will increase by 2 to 3 centimeters.
Next slide. As already discussed, blood and other fluids migrate from the legs to the upper part of the body. This diversion of bodily fluids from the lower part of the body causes the legs to become thinner and the layer of hard skin on the soles of the feet to disappear. Next slide.
On Earth, blood settles to your feet when you stand. The blood pressure in your feet is high, around 200 millimeters of mercury, and in the brain, blood pressure is normally around 60 to 80 millimeters of mercury. In space, the blood pressure equalizes and settles to about 100 millimeters of mercury throughout the body. This higher blood pressure in the brain raises an alarm that the body has too much blood. Within 2 to 3 days, an astronaut can lose as much as 22% of their blood. A signal to the brain occurs to equalize blood pressure in a weightless environment. The number of red blood corpuscles falls, and this can lead to diminished oxygenation and a reduction in physical capacity. Next slide.
The left ventricle of the heart shrinks by 10%, resulting in a greater fatigue. With less blood, the heart does not have to pump as fast. These lead to atrophy. A weakened heart results in lower blood pressure and can produce a problem of orthostatic tolerance, the body's ability to send oxygen to the brain without fainting.
Next slide. The liver is affected by the loss of weight in space due to the fact that it causes different types of diseases, such as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Another example on how it is affected is researchers found potential liver scarring on experimental mice they sent to space for 13 and a half days. The mice showed symptoms of liver failure and scarring on the liver. Researchers are still trying to figure out if it will affect humans as it does mice.
Next slide. The muscles are used to combat gravity. In a microgravitational environment, muscles used to maintain posture can lose around 20% of their mass. Muscle mass can vanish at a rate as high as 5% a week.
Next slide. Bones are made up of calcium, phosphorus, sodium, and other minerals, as well as a protein, collagen. Bones in space atrophy at a rate about 1% a month. Total loss could reach 40 to 60%. Next slide.
In a weightless environment, a human cannot smell, and thus the taste would be dulled. This is why astronauts would eat foods that are strong tasting to combat the loss of taste. Next slide.
Space motion sickness symptoms are similar to those in other forms of motion sickness. They include pallor, increase of body warmth, cold sweating, malaise, loss of appetite, nausea, fatigue, vomiting, and anorexia.
Next. Artificial gravity is a theoretical increase or decrease of apparent gravity or g-force by artificial means. The creation or simulation of said artificial gravity can be done by utilizing rotation. A rotating spacecraft will produce the feeling of inertia inside of the hull. The rotation compels all objects and people inside of the ship towards the hull. This phenomena is referred to as centrifugal force. In the near future, astronauts can avoid many of the aforementioned ailments by riding in a vehicle with gravity produced by the very movement of the ship. Next slide.
While in space, astronauts are exposed to microgravity. This itself already poses as a serious health risk to astronauts, and even more so when the astronauts are exposed to the increased amounts of radiation in space. Without the protection of our planet's atmosphere, the astronauts will have to take special precautions to prevent radiation poisoning. Next slide.
Adjusting to space is easier than adjusting to Earth for me. I never felt completely normal up there, but coming back to gravity is harder than leaving gravity. Scott Kelly. And through this project, we have demonstrated the 5 stepping stones, and I would like to end this presentation with another quote from Scott Kelly. Records are meant to be broken. I am looking forward to when the records in space are surpassed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final school will be Laurel Highlands Middle School. We have Abigail Filitsky, Alexandra Junko, and Derek Nastasi. Welcome.
A little over 4.5 hours ago in a school fairly far away. Next slide. Episode 2016, Stepping Stones to Mars. In a period of a few short months, 41 students and 5 teachers worked together to learn quarterbacks of life, stepping stones to success, and how they applied not only to their lives, but how NASA uses them as well. Next slide. Students and teachers alike explored NASA's plans to turn their dreams into realities. Although there are things along the way to block the path of success, NASA's continued self-improvement and forward motion keep driving them to the goal of Mars 2030. I, Derek Nastasi, along with my counterparts Alexandra Junko and Abby Filitsky, present to you, next slide, Journey to Mars. Next slide. In a tiny town far, far away, we all have dreams and goals. We give you 2 goals, a man on Mars and a deadline of 2030. Imagine it. How do we make it happen? We have a dream, space exploration to Mars. Then we set goals to get there. Our goal right now is to make the human body adaptable to the atmospheric changes of space for more than a year so we could get to Mars. NASA's big dream is to go to Mars, which is now made a possible goal with their experience and technology. NASA, like all of us, has success stoppers, and some of them is the various effects on the human body by the atmospheric changes of space. But they are combating them and is winning so far. It is predicted that soon NASA will accomplish their goal of Mars 2030. Next slide.
Overall, NASA has been a successful program, but with everything that leads to success, there are problems. According to the Quarterbacks of Life Foundation, these problems are called success stoppers. Some of these success stoppers include space radiation, damage to the eyes and digestive system, loss of muscle mass, damage to the heart, and the rapid pace of aging effects on the astronauts. They keep NASA from getting to Mars. NASA has to come up with ways to overcome these success stoppers. Some examples can include continuing research and studying the astronauts' health and safety, productivity, and success in space. They find their research by recording environmental factors, studying behavioral health, how exercise affects the body, habitability, medical capabilities, psychosocial and behavioral health, and space radiation. Next slide. NASA has to work as a team to eliminate success stoppers and get to Mars. The more intelligence you have, the more effective you will be. If someone has an idea for creating a vaccine or specialized suit for the astronauts, then maybe another member will have an idea for how to make it a reality. NASA has to plan and decide who, what, when, where, and how to carry out the processes of space exploration. If specialized teams cooperate well together on the Mars project every day until the set time of 2030, it is our belief that the Mars project will be successful. As a team, we may not fix all of the success stoppers, but we can eliminate them one by one. For example, NASA planned the one-year trip to space. They decided to send astronaut Scott Kelly into space and keep his brother on Earth so that they could record the changes of the body based on being in space for a long period of time. They planned out the whole trip from the day Scott went into space until the day he returned. It was a plan solely based on teamwork, decisions, organization, planning, and intelligence. By using these steps, NASA was able to effectively take Scott Kelly into space and bring him back with all of the research that they needed. Hopefully, in the future, NASA will be able to get to Mars using these same steps. Next slide.
There is a wide variety of success stoppers when it comes to going beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Some of these include lower levels of gravity, isolation, hostile environments, space radiation, and the distance from Earth. There are others, but these factors are considered success stoppers because they are capable of harming the body, thus hindering forward movement. In order to complete our goal of traveling to planet Mars, we must overcome these challenges. Although finding a safe way to travel to Mars is difficult, NASA has been working hard to find the solutions. By knowing what these success stoppers are, it will help us overcome them. NASA has made much progress, and new discoveries and developments will be made so we can achieve success. Next slide, please. We can make it to Mars if we follow the stepping stones to success. We should ensure that we always have a blueprint to success. On our journey to success, be sure to understand yourself, your resources, and your potential success stoppers. On your way to success, you must have team support. When you work together, everybody achieves more. Now that you have a blueprint to success, you will need to decide and plan out your journey. Lastly, be sure to have a positive mental attitude. If we start a process of self-improvement that leads to forward movement in the directions of our dreams and goals, we are sure to become successful on our journey. We have to remember that we can choose success, and success stoppers are real. If we continue to follow the stepping stones to success and correctly address the success stoppers on our journey, we can achieve success no matter the obstacles. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our students. This concludes our formal program. For more information about the exciting work at NASA, I invite you to go to www.nasa.gov, and you can follow us on all of our social media accounts. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.